Hello, I'm Miss Ginsburg with KnowAtom, and today we're going to be reading Cell Functions. This is a lab manual in Unit 4. Section 1, Cells and Life. Discovering life under ice. Almost 1 kilometer beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, scientists have discovered a lake. This lake is so far beneath the surface that it hasn't been exposed to sun or wind for millions of years. Despite its location, the lake is home to more than 4,000 different kinds of living things. These living things are all microorganisms. An organism is a complete living thing that has the ability to carry out all functions for life. Function is the normal action of something or how something works. A microorganism, also called a microbe, is an organism too small to see with the human eye. The places where life is found continue to surprise scientists. For example, before 1977, scientists thought the sun was the primary source of energy for all living things, so life couldn't exist where sunlight didn't reach. Since then, scientists have continued to find life in surprising places, including some of the deepest parts of the ocean, and now far below an Antarctic ice sheet. The discovery of life underneath the West Antarctic ice sheet confirms for the scientists something they had predicted years before. It took years to find evidence to confirm their prediction, however. Scientists began their project in 2009, and in 2013, they drilled down more than 0.8 kilometers, or 0.5 miles, beneath the ice sheet in subglacial Lake Whillans. Characteristics of life. The scientists of the expedition to the West Antarctic ice sheet used microscopes to identify the different organisms they found. Then they had to show that the organisms were alive and growing. All living things, from microbes to humans, share certain characteristics. For example, all organisms need energy to survive. If they get enough energy, all organisms will grow and then eventually die. And all organisms are made up of cells. The cell is the smallest unit of life. Cells are alive because they use energy to carry out life functions. Life functions include growing, developing, and getting energy from food. Energy is required because it powers all of these actions. Some organisms are made up of just one cell. Other organisms are made up of hundreds, thousands, or millions of cells. Cells come in a variety of shapes and sizes. Like all matter, cells are made up of molecules. Living things take in new molecules from air, food, and liquids. These molecules get into the cells and help them function. Cells are systems because they are made up of different structures that help them carry out their life functions. In some cells, these individual parts are surrounded by a membrane, and they are called organelles. An organelle is a small part that carries out a specific function in a cell. In other cells, the smaller parts of the cell are not surrounded by a membrane. All living things can be divided into two broad groups depending on whether their cells have membrane-bound organelles or not. These two groups are called prokaryotes and eukaryotes. The word eukaryote means with nucleus. The nucleus is the control center of eukaryote cells because it contains the organism's genetic information stored in DNA. All eukaryotic cells have a nucleus and other organelles that are surrounded by a membrane. Eukaryotic cells are many times larger than prokaryotic cells, between 2 and 10 micrometers in length. Because of their size, nutrients cannot rapidly get to all parts of the cell, so eukaryotes need many specialized organelles that deliver nutrients to where they are needed in the cell. Eukaryotes can be either single-celled or multi-celled organisms. Animals and plants are multi-celled eukaryotes. In multi-celled organisms, all of the cells work together to keep the organism functioning. Animals are eukaryotic organisms that eat other organisms for energy, breathe oxygen, and undergo growth and reproduction. Humans, bears, and ants are animals. Plants are eukaryotic organisms that capture energy from sunlight for growth and development, and they make their own food through photosynthesis. We'll explore photosynthesis more in section 3. Protists are a third kind of eukaryotic organism that can be single-celled or multicelled. Some protists perform photosynthesis like plants, while others move around like animals. Diatoms, amoebas, algae, and other hard-to-classify organisms are protists. The other group of organisms is prokaryote, and these organisms were the earliest forms of life on Earth. The word prokaryote means before nucleus. They are called this because prokaryotes don't have a nucleus or other membrane-bound organelles. All the internal structures in a prokaryotic cell are spread throughout its cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is the jelly-like liquid that makes up most of a cell's volume. This structure is an advantage because it allows prokaryotes to absorb nutrients quickly. Prokaryotes are simple single-celled organisms. Because they are single cells, that one cell carries out all of the life functions necessary for the organisms to survive. Scientists found that many of the organisms that live in Lake Whillans are a kind of prokaryote called archaea. Archaea are single-celled organisms that can live in extreme environments, including hot springs and extremely salty water, where most life cannot survive. They have also been found in the digestive tracts of cows, termites, and various forms of marine life. Bacteria are another common kind of prokaryote. There are typically 40 million bacterial cells in 1 gram of soil and 1 million bacterial cells in 1 milliliter of fresh water. A cell's structure and function. Cells come in many different shapes and sizes. However, all cells, both eukaryote and prokaryote, have certain things in common. For example, all cells have cytoplasm and a cell membrane. The cell membrane is a protective membrane that surrounds a cell and selects what molecules can enter and exit the cell. The cell membrane is like a skin that has many pores. We'll explore the structure and function of the cell membrane more in the next section. Eukaryotes have specific organelles to help them carry out their life functions. Each organelle has a specific function that contributes to the overall functioning of the cell. For example, the mitochondria are the power centers of the cell. They combine sugar from food with oxygen to produce molecules that the cell uses for energy. The nucleus tells all of the other organelles what to do. This is possible because the nucleus contains the cell's DNA. DNA is an instruction manual for how the cell should look and what it should do because it holds all of the information to build new proteins. Proteins are large, complex molecules that play many important roles in the cell. Both prokaryotes and eukaryotes have DNA, but in eukaryotes, the DNA is tightly packed in the nucleus. The DNA is protected because the nucleus is surrounded by a nuclear membrane, which decides what molecules enter and exit the nucleus. Ribosomes are structures in both prokaryotes and eukaryotes that build proteins according to the cell's DNA. Genetic instructions from the DNA travel through the nuclear membrane to reach the ribosomes. Ribosomes then use the information in DNA to build proteins. Each cell builds proteins for its own uses, including for growth and repair. Ribosomes are the smallest and most common organelles in a cell. In eukaryotes, ribosomes either float freely through the cytoplasm or are attached to an organelle called the endoplasmic reticulum. The endoplasmic reticulum is a network of membranes where many proteins are built because many ribosomes attach themselves to it. The part of the ER that has ribosomes attached to it is called rough endoplasmic reticulum. Smooth endoplasmic reticulum has no ribosomes attached to it. Because of its role in making proteins, the ER is located near the cell nucleus. The Golgi complex is a series of membranes that adjust to the shape of proteins and transports them to their place in the cell. The Golgi complex transports proteins by wrapping them in vesicles, small sacs that bud off from a membrane. Plant versus animal cells. Animal cells and plant cells share most of the same organelles because they are both eukaryotes, but there are some differences. The following are organelles that differ between a plant cell and an animal cell. Vacuole. Vacuoles are sac-like organelles that store water for the cell. Vacuoles in animal cells are small and float freely in the cytoplasm. Plant cells contain a larger central vacuole. Up to 90% of a plant cell may be taken up by the central vacuole. This vacuole fills with water and waste from the cell. A plant wilts if its cells lose water in their central vacuoles. Chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are only found in plant cells. Chloroplasts contain a green pigment called chlorophyll. This pigment gives plant cells their green color. It also absorbs sunlight, which begins a process of turning carbon dioxide and water into a kind of sugar called glucose, which plants use for energy, growth, and development. Animals do not have chloroplasts, and so they must eat other organisms for energy and nutrients. Cell wall. A cell wall is a stiff, shell-like wall that surrounds the cell membrane of plant cells and helps plants stand up. Plant cell walls are made of cellulose, which is a type of sugar molecule. Animals often have skeletons, or exoskeletons in the case of insects, to help support them. Because animal cells are not confined by a rigid cell wall, they have developed more kinds of cells, especially those that enable movement. Centrosome. Centrosomes are only found in animal cells. They are sets of tubular organelles that help the cell divide. Section 2. The cell membrane. The bull shark. Most sharks can only live in the ocean. This is because they cannot survive in fresh water. They depend on salt water for survival. The bull shark is different. It can survive in both freshwater and saltwater, and it has been found 2,000 miles from the ocean in the Amazon River. In the United States, bull sharks have been found as far up the Mississippi River as Illinois. The bull shark's ability to survive in both saltwater and freshwater has to do with how its body regulates the amount of water it has relative to the amount of salts and other molecules in its body. This happens at the cellular level with the cell membrane and at the organism level with the skin. Let's begin with the cell membrane. In all organisms, the cell membrane is semi-permeable. Because it allows some molecules through but blocks out others. Molecules that are large or unknown are usually blocked by the cell membrane to protect it. But there are different ways that molecules can pass through the cell membrane. For example, nutrients must pass through the cell membrane to nourish the cell. And water flows in and out of cells easily because the cell membrane has pores large enough for water to travel through. The ability of water to flow into and out of the cell is essential to the cell's survival. All cells need to maintain a balanced concentration of water and dissolved particles called solutes. If the concentration of water to solutes is unequal, water will move from the area of its highest concentration to the area of lowest concentration until the concentrations are equal. The flow of water. This balancing of water and solutes happens through the process of osmosis. Osmosis is the diffusion of water across a semi-permeable membrane. Osmosis only happens when there are more solutes on one side of the cell membrane than on the other side, and when the membrane is permeable to water but impermeable to the solute. Impermeable means it blocks the solutes. During osmosis, water moves from an area of high water concentration to an area of low water concentration. An area has a high water concentration when it has few solutes, such as salt, compared to the amount of water. An area has low water concentration if it has less water and more solutes. This means that water will move toward the side of the cell membrane where there are more solutes because there is less water there. In other words, water follows the particles to decrease their concentration. Osmotic pressure describes pressure caused by the particles that are unable to cross the cell membrane. Water flows from the solution with the lower solute concentration, low osmotic pressure, into the solution with higher solute concentration, higher osmotic pressure. Equilibrium is reached when enough water has moved to balance the solute concentration on each side of the cell membrane. You can see evidence of osmosis when you get thirsty after eating something salty or drinking salt water. The salt increases the osmotic pressure throughout your body, drawing water toward the salt particles and out of your cells and making you feel thirsty. Osmosis in plant and animal cells. The health and survival of plants and animals depends on the ability of their cells to maintain a balanced concentration of water and solutes, which they achieve through osmosis. If a plant or animal cell is placed in a solution containing water, osmosis will cause one of three things to happen, depending on the solution's tonicity, the measure of water lost or gained from osmosis. The cell will remain the same if the solution surrounding the cell has the same water solute concentration as the cell. In this case, the solution is isotonic. The cell will gain water and therefore mass if the solution surrounding the cell has a higher water concentration than the cell. In this case, the solution is said to be hypotonic because there are fewer solutes in the solution than in the cell. This flow of water into the cell will cause the cell to expand. Too much water in an animal cell can cause the cell to expand so much it bursts. The cell wall in plant cells prevent them from bursting. The cell will lose water, and therefore mass, if the solution surrounding the cell has a lower water concentration. In this case, the solution is hypertonic because there are more solutes in the solution than in the cell, causing the cell to shrink. Plants rely on osmosis to move water from their roots up to their leaves. The concentration of solutes in the top of a plant draws water upwards. As the vacuoles in the plant cells fill with water, the cell walls prevent the cells from bursting. The water pressure in the plant cells keeps the plant rigid and helps it maintain stability. In hypertonic environments, a plant wilts because its cells lose water. Bull sharks in fresh and salt water. Osmosis happens at the level of the organism as well. The ability of an organism to keep a constant concentration of water in its body in different kinds of environments is called osmoregulation. In other words, the organism's body regulates osmosis so that it has a balanced amount of water in its body. However, most organisms are designed to carry out osmosis in a particular environment. For example, drinking salt water actually speeds up dehydration in humans, causing our cells to lose water molecules and making us thirstier. Marine animals have the opposite problem. Marine animals have to prevent dehydration because they are surrounded by high concentrations of salt. They do this by keeping a high concentration of solutes in their bloodstream. This causes water to flow from the environment into their bodies. The extra salt that they continually absorb from the ocean water is released from their bodies in their urine. For most sharks, they cannot change these processes. As a result, if most sharks are put into fresh water, they will absorb too much water and lose too much salt to be able to survive. But bull sharks are different. They can adapt their osmoregulation when they move into a freshwater environment. When bull sharks swim from the ocean to a river, their bodies change their osmoregulation so that less salt is released into their urine. This allows them to survive in both saltwater and freshwater environments. Section 3. The dynamic cell. Organisms in the dark. Dr. Cindy Van Dover and a team of scientists spent 40 days sailing around the Indian Ocean. They were studying a newly discovered deep-sea hydrothermal vent. Hydrothermal vents form along mid-ocean ridges in places where the seafloor moves apart very slowly because of Earth's tectonic plates. As the cold ocean water flows into the cracks in the seafloor, it is warmed by the hot interior. This causes a scalding hot mixture of water and minerals to get pushed upwards. The scientists found dozens of red and white worm-like organisms growing around the hydrothermal vents. These tube worms are 0.9 meters or 3 feet long. They have no eyes, no mouth, and no intestines. Scientists are particularly interested in where the organisms deep under the ocean get energy to survive. Remember that all cells, and therefore all living things, need energy to survive. Unlike most organisms on Earth, the energy that supports life deep in the sea comes from within Earth itself. As the scalding hot water erupts, it carries with it hydrogen sulfide and other molecules that contain chemical energy. Deep sea bacteria take in the molecules to access that chemical energy, which they use to produce sugars that fuel their life processes. The tube worms and other organisms eat the bacteria, accessing some of the energy to support their own life functions. Energy and matter interact. Knowing how organisms access energy is essential for understanding life itself. Energy is essential for cells because every cell is constantly working, carrying out all of its essential life functions. Because of this, cells are never static or unchanging. In fact, all cells are always changing, generating energy, building proteins, transporting materials, and getting rid of waste. All animals, including humans, get energy and nutrients when we eat and drink. Nutrients are the chemicals that organisms need for energy and for building and maintaining the parts of a cell. Nutrients include carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, as well as vitamins, minerals, and water. Because food is matter, it is made up of molecules. The bonds that hold food molecules together store chemical energy, energy stored in the bonds of atoms and molecules. Our bodies break down and rearrange those food molecules through chemical reactions to produce new molecules that help to maintain cells and allow the organisms to grow. Some of those new molecules become part of the organism, helping it grow and develop. At the same time, some energy is released as a result of the chemical reactions. Because of this, food is important because it provides both energy and building materials for organisms. Energy flows through organisms. When you eat something, your body and its cells breaks the food down into smaller parts, including molecules of a sugar called glucose. Glucose is a molecule made up of 6 carbon atoms, 6 oxygen atoms, and 12 hydrogen atoms. However, the energy found in glucose cannot be used by your cells until it is stored in molecules called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. Chemical reactions take the glucose from food along with oxygen and turn those molecules into molecules of ATP. In addition to ATP molecules, carbon dioxide and water are also produced. The carbon dioxide and water are released from the body as waste. This process of producing energy the cell can use is called cellular respiration, and in eukaryotes, it takes place in the cell's mitochondria. Cellular respiration is always happening in cells. Without ATP, the cell would not be able to carry out its essential functions, including growing, dividing, and repairing or replacing worn-out organelles. This is why mitochondria are called the power centers of the cell. Energy is always flowing and matter cycling between organisms and their environment. In order to understand how this happens, it is important to start with the energy source. For deep sea organisms, that energy source comes from deep within Earth's interior. For most other organisms, that energy begins with the sun. As the sun shines, it produces light energy. When the chloroplasts in the plant cells absorb the sunlight, they begin the process of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis uses the sun's energy to convert carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and a kind of sugar called glucose, which holds stored chemical energy. During photosynthesis, chemical reactions happen that transform matter that is not food, including carbon dioxide and water, into matter that is food, specifically glucose. Plants use glucose as a building material for their structures and store some of it. That glucose gets passed from plants to animals that eat plants. When we eat food, we get some of that stored glucose, and our cells use the glucose in cellular respiration. Like animals, plants use glucose for cellular respiration as well. As a result, matter and energy are constantly interacting to power all life functions through photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Wow. I learned a lot reading cell functions, and I hope that you did too. I'll see you tomorrow with another one. Bye.